How to engage ERGs. Yes, this is not the first video I've done on this, but it's because I get asked it so much. Our ERG engagement is on the floor. Nobody's coming to our events. We don't know what to do. I've heard it so many times. I thought, let me just come on again and do another video on it. And in particular, I wanted to do it as part of this series, which is kind of like around setting ERGs up for success and being sort of quite specific about it. So this is the fourth video in that kind of like mini series, ERG engagement. Do you know what's really interesting? I was having a conversation with somebody, I want to say like maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I was talking about this, you know, how I get asked it so much. And they said exactly what I've been saying for a long time. Often when people say that they are having a problem with ERG engagement or engagement in their employee network, the problem is not engagement. The problem is what you are doing. The problem is that you're doing things that do not engage. The problem is not engagement. I'd actually expand on that slightly. And so you'll know this video is going to come with a bit of tough love, right? So there's the warning. It's one of two things. It's either that you're doing the wrong things or you're doing the right things, but they're not being communicated well enough. And so people don't realize that the right things are being done. And that's why you've got the engagement issue. So that's what we're going to get into, right? So addressing ERG engagement, why people don't engage. I'm going to give you an example that I've given you before if you've been in one of my training sessions. And I've got actually several examples of this, but I'm going to give you one specific example. I was doing some training for an organisation in London about maybe 18 months ago, just under 18 months ago. And somebody was basically talking about their network and saying, you know, we run this monthly come together where people can just like come, just network, you know, have a chit chat, etc. And we've been running it for a few months. And at first people were coming, and now nobody comes to this monthly, you know, chit chat get together. And then in this training session, the DI lead was in the training session, and he said, oh, what's really interesting is though, when our chief investment officer needed some volunteers from that particular network to support on an investment strategy review, there was no end of volunteers. And that, like, I could literally just finish the whole video there. That sums it up, right? Especially when people are time poor and they don't want to be seen to kind of just like be taking part in stuff that is of no value or isn't benefiting their day job or the business. They're not going to just be turning up at random things that appear to have no purpose. So when it comes to, if there's a piece of work where it's quite clear that it connects to, like, you know, a business outcome, so it's seen as like work, it's real work for the business or the organization, and it can potentially benefit them in their career. So it's almost like a bit of a development opportunity, or it's going to raise their profile. Then guess what? They're engaged. Right? So that's it. You know, if I could just leave you with one thing from this video, people want to get involved in real work, especially, as I heard recently, somebody was saying in a course that I was teaching, the scrutiny that they're getting over their time. I mean, we saw this in the UK last September, where in the civil service, you know, networks were told, in fact, the words that were used was that they were doing nonsense events in work time. And I won't go into the specifics of it. Well, I might do that in another video, or in a Substack behind a paywall where I do some of these trickier things. But they were accused of doing nonsense events in work time. When you've got scrutiny like that on ERGs, you've got to make sure that the stuff that you are doing, especially during work time, is of benefit to the organization, is of benefit to the individual and their, you know, their career advancement, their career development, or is of benefit to the wider community or society. It's got to have a point to it, right? I'm going to get off my soapbox now. So that's the biggest issue with engagement. It's like, people don't want to, you know, kind of like waste time coming to just like, you know, chit chat or like social events. They just don't. And while you may get people at first when the networks first started and people are a bit excited, and yes, they want to find out who else is in the organization, and yes, they potentially want to make friends and connect with people that are going through similar lived experience at that particular workplace. They don't want that long term. Like long term, it has to be real work. So it's what you're doing. That's the issue, right? Don't just look at engagement. You have to look at what you're doing. And if you're not sure whether you are or aren't doing the right things, you have to ask people. So when people come to events, assuming that people do come to events, I always advocate like having a 4 or 5 question survey at the end of each event and ask people what they want to see. What events or initiatives or activities do you want this network to put on? When it comes to relevance, ask people, was this event relevant to your role? You know, was it useful? Was it meaningful? So you've got to start getting that feedback to make sure then that your things are engaging, right? So what are some of your strategies? Okay. Just before I get into like some of the more generic strategies, I've got a specific video around frontline engagement, which I know can be very different to individuals that work in HQ roles, head office roles, or individuals that have laptops or, you know, computers or whatever. So there's a whole video on frontline engagement. Please do go and watch that. If you've got, for example, colleagues that work in retail, so maybe they work in store, or maybe they are in operational roles like manufacturing, or they're in healthcare or whatever, where they can't necessarily access laptops, or they can't do, you know, like Zoom events and things like that, or they can't even do events where they're like you know, regularly able to come together at a particular location. So please do check out that video. I've also got a specific video on engagement through use of a tool like Viva Engage. So I've got a specific video delving into Viva Engage, because that is something, and going into strategies actually, a way to drive engagement that's wider than just your committee, so it's not just a handful of people taking part in things, is to actually distribute out the roles of something like Viva Engagement, right? So in that video, I talk about different roles that you need to kind of like keep Viva engaged, lively and thriving. It's a perfect opportunity to delegate it down out into the community so that you've got more than just the committee getting involved in building this sense of community, right? So knowing your audience and what they need, so running things like your member surveys, particularly after every event, and just a few questions. And I know sometimes some organisations complain that people are being over-surveyed. Obviously, we don't want to over-survey people. We don't want to do that, but you've got to find out what it is that people need. So understanding the audience and understanding what people need. If you don't want to be running surveys that happen too regularly, then maybe a once a year survey is fine. Make sure that you're programming, or that the activities that you're doing, you know, that there's some variety to it. So it's not all just one thing. So it's not all, for example, just networking events. Make sure that there is a bit of variety. You've maybe got, you know, some policy reviews in there. And when you're doing something like a policy review, you're actually delegating it out. Maybe you're creating like a subgroup, like a focus group. And if you are getting involved in, you know, something that's interesting like that, you're potentially bringing some of that thinking into Viva Engage. And you're like, you know, we're looking at the XYZ policy. What are your thoughts on it? What should we be asking for X, Y, and Z? So you're kind of finding a way of pulling other members into interesting pieces of work. So having a diverse range of activities within the network is important. And then the final one I'm going to talk about is just hitting that sweet spot. And for me, when I talk about the sweet spot is, do the activities that we're doing benefit the members of the network, right? But do they also benefit the wider business? Colleagues who aren't members of the network, who might look at what we're doing and say, oh my gosh, I actually want to join that. The business, you know, the business in a wider sense in terms of the brand reputation, how the business is positioned in the market, you know, does what we're doing benefit that? That's the sweet spot. And then potentially, you know, the community and society at large, especially if it's sort of like charitable or mission-led or purpose-driven or volunteer work out in the community. Those sorts of things tend to really drive business engagement, where you hit the sweet spot. The more of those groups you can benefit, members, colleagues not in the network, the business, the community, you know, society, sort of making good. The more of those things you can tick, the more of the sweet spot you can get at, the more engaged people will be. I guarantee it. So that's it. I would encourage you, if you are really struggling with ERG engagement, I hope this was useful and wasn't too much of a whistle stop tour. Please do check out the frontline engagement video that I did and the Viva Engage video. If you are struggling, the first place that you need to look is, what are we doing as a network? That's where the issue is. The issue isn't with the people that aren't coming, you know, because I know it's easier for you to feel like, I'm doing all of this work, you know, we're doing all of this work as a committee and people just aren't coming. And I get that. And I applaud you for carrying on, especially when people aren't coming. But the thing that you've got to look at is, what are you doing? Because that, I guarantee you, that is where the problem is. So a little bit of tough love today. Hopefully it wasn't too tough. That's it for the end of the series of 4. If you found this kind of like mini series useful, this series was kind of more around like setup and startup, really for employee resource groups. If you found it useful and you want me to do other mini series, for example, different roles of like, you know, the co-chair, the comms lead, etc., I can do that. What do you want to see? Let me know. And hopefully you found this useful. If you did, please subscribe, share, send it to somebody who you think it will be useful for, maybe the rest of your committee members, the ones that are complaining about the engagement and nobody turning up. I hope that was useful for you today. New videos Tuesdays, and I will see you on Friday morning, 8:30 UK time on the LinkedIn Live. Ciao. Bye.